Sure, Disney does some shot for shot here and nobody complains. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Disney's 1999 animated musical anthology sequel, Fantasia 2000. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Fantasia 2000 stars James Levine, Steve Martin, and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and was directed by Don Hahn and 6 other people. Similar to the 1940 original film, it's a collection of animated short films accompanied by a live-action orchestra. So, last week I delivered a little bit of a hot take regarding the original Fantasia. I know it's an almost universally praised film and a shining example of Disney artistry, even 80 years after its initial release, but it's just never been a film I could get into or connect with on any level. As a fan of Disney movies, I know that's kind of a blasphemous thing to admit. Well, I can do you one better. I actually prefer Fantasia 2000 to the original Fantasia. Now, I know that probably sounds crazy, and you might be inclined to attribute that to nostalgia or the fact that the sequel came out when I was a kid, but I actually didn't see this in theaters. In fact, I think it's the only Disney movie that I didn't go to see when I was a kid. At the time, I already wasn't a fan of the original Fantasia, so I didn't watch this until it was on TV years later. And even now, I'm pretty sure this most recent viewing was only my 3rd time watching it. So yeah, no nostalgia here for me. As with any sequel, especially one that took 60 years to make, Fantasia 2000 was a bit risky and could have really brought down the wrath of fans of the original. Luckily, the anthology format of both films helped to alleviate some of the complications that a more narrative sequel would have had to have faced. Still though, Fantasia 2000 had some big shoes to fill, or at least a high bar to reach. Even though I don't like Fantasia, I can still appreciate it and recognize that it has this sort of magical quality to it for so many people. So, does Fantasia 2000 have that same magic? For the most part, I think so. One of the most noticeable changes is the animation. The original film certainly employed a number of different animation styles, however, they all still had that handcrafted feel to them, because, well, they were handcrafted. There was no other option in 1940, but 1999 was a different story. Hand-drawn animation is still prominently featured in many of the segments, but some also make use of CG animation and computer-assisted coloring. And while those segments can be considered magical in their own right, they definitely have a different feel to them. They're noticeably more modern in their style, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, just something that contrasts a bit more with the original Fantasia. Another thing that might affect the magic of this film is the tone. The overall tone and style of each of the segments here vary a decent amount, much like they did in the original film. But on the whole, Fantasia 2000 feels like a less grand affair. There's always been something extra artsy and sort of profound about the original. It really prided itself on its experimental nature and felt deeper and more mature as a result. Fantasia 2000, on the other hand, has a certain lightness to it. It's more playful and kind of comical. This lightness extends to the live-action portion too, and contributes to that loss of grandeur. While the original Fantasia felt like a concert performance, this one sort of feels more like an award ceremony, with each segment being introduced by a different celebrity, often in a very goofy manner. So why then do I like this more than the original? Well, the main reason is that these segments are much more plot-driven than the ones in Fantasia. I'm still really not much of an anthology fan, but at least the segments here, with the exception of Beethoven's Fifth, are far less abstract. They're much more akin to standalone instrumental short films, and have actual plots that you can follow rather than just being an artistic experience. As with the original, there's still a lot of variation when it comes to the animation, stories, and individual tones, but I found the segments a lot easier to latch onto and connect with here. Like I said in my review of the 1940 Fantasia, I'm definitely a plot and character person, so having those things be more emphasized here certainly helped with my enjoyment of the film. The other thing that significantly helped was the runtime. Fantasia 2000 is only 74 minutes long. That might sound too short, even by animated film standards, but honestly, it's the perfect length for a movie like this. After all, it is just a collection of animated shorts linked together by brief live action introductions. That's what Fantasia was too, but somehow that original film dragged on for more than 2 hours. That, combined with the far less interesting segments, make for a film that's difficult for me to get through in one sitting. I start to fade by the halfway point of that movie, whereas I can stay invested for the entirety of Fantasia 2000. So, the sequel might not be able to capture the exact same type of magic as the 1940 original, but I think it delivers a worthy homage to and continuation of the beloved classic. So, just like with the first movie, I want to give you a quick ranking of the 8 animated segments of this film. This is just my personal preference and includes everything: the animation, the stories, the music, all of it. Coming in last place is the Carnival of Animals. It reminded me a lot of a goofier version of Dance of the Hours from the original, which, not coincidentally, was also my 8th ranked segment there. This is definitely much better than that one, and thankfully very short, but animals dancing in unison is clearly not my thing. At number 7 is Symphony number 5. I actually really like the music of Beethoven's Fifth, but this is the lone abstract segment in this film, which put it near the bottom of the pile. Number 6 is Pomp and Circumstance. The animation here was nice, and throwing Donald Duck into a telling of Noah's Ark was unique, but the music felt like such a strange mismatch. Number 5 is The Steadfast Tin Soldier. This is probably the gloomiest segment overall, and while I appreciated how dark it got at points and the Toy Story-esque nature, it wasn't really one that'll stick with me. Number 4 has gotta be The Pines of Rome. For whatever reason, this is the segment that always immediately comes to my mind when I think of Fantasia 2000. If you were to apply the adjective magical to any single segment here, this would be the one. It's a very odd story, but the mixture of animation styles works nicely. Number 3 is The Sorcerer's Apprentice. This is the lone repeat from Fantasia. It was my favorite segment there, and still one of my favorites here, with its very clear, story-driven narrative. Number 2 is the Firebird Suite. From an animation standpoint, this is the standout for me. It's all very realistic looking and has some incredibly dark and scary moments in its story about the cyclic nature of life. And that means number 1 has gotta be Rhapsody in Blue. Not only is it my favorite song of the bunch, but it's got a wonderfully intertwined story and incredibly unique animation that kinda reminds me of the intermission clip they used to show at the drive-in when I was a kid. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 has got to be how plot-driven the segments are. They're nearly all proper short films this time around. They've got beginnings, middles, and endings. They've got characters, conflicts, and resolutions. It all still matches up with the music as intended, but they're much easier to latch onto and stay invested in. There's no aimless meandering this time around, and that honestly means that there aren't any segments that I actively dislike here. The second pro is the runtime. I know it might sound like a knock or a backhanded compliment to say that a runtime of only 74 minutes is a pro, but it truly is a positive thing. And I'm not just happy that I can be done with it in a bit over an hour. It's actually far more manageable of a runtime than that of its predecessor. Fantasia was over 2 hours long, which was just far too long for what it was. 74 minutes is perfect and lets me stay invested the whole time through. On the con side, the biggest issue is the lack of grandeur. On its own, that's not really a big deal for me, but when compared to the original Fantasia, it feels like a bit of a step down. It's much more accessible as a result, but it loses some of the lofty artiness and classiness and feels much less consequential. Like I said before, the original movie felt like you were at a symphony orchestra performance. Fantasia 2000's more like an awards show, paying homage to that orchestra. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Fantasia 2000 or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm going to give Fantasia 2000 2.5 out of 5 paws. I'm still not an anthology person, but I like this film quite a bit more than the original Fantasia. In fact, with the variety and plot-driven stories, this actually comes up just shy of 3 paws for me. I would recommend Fantasia 2000, most obviously to fans of the 1940 Fantasia. It's a little different, and definitely an updated take on the style, but I think it's actually a really good continuation, picking up where the original left off. And if you're not a fan of Fantasia, I'd still suggest you give this one a shot. It'll probably never become a favorite of yours or anything, but if you're like me, you might find this one a little bit easier to connect with and a lot more manageable to watch. If you liked Fantasia 2000, I would obviously recommend Fantasia. This is the 1940 original that established this experimental blend of classical music and animation in the Disney lineup. The animation's fantastic, and it's widely regarded as a classic. If you liked the Steadfast Tin Soldier segment, you should really check out Toy Story. Not only does it have a similar toys come to life when nobody's around story, but it also has some similar CG animation. And if you like the Firebird Suite segment and want another environmentally focused, frequently dark animated film, you should watch Princess Mononoke. It's an anime film and certainly has its odd moments, but it's got a very powerful story. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Fantasia 2000? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite animated anthology film? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.